Thank you very much, Minister. In a second, I'm going to invite the panelists to speak, starting with Rina and moving towards me in that direction. And if you could keep your comments to 5 minutes so that we have time for Q&A, that would be great. My name's Kate Hampton. I'm from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. And we're very excited to be helping moderate this panel today. We often think about children as just the school-age years, the sort of 5 to 15. And I'm going to encourage the panel to talk a little bit more about early childhood and a little bit more about adolescence and the transition to adulthood, because those are sometimes forgotten in the conversation. Babies' brains grow at an astounding rate. You get about 1,000 neural connections every second forming in a baby's brain. And any neural connection that isn't used dies. So early stimulation of children from the ages of 0 to 2 is absolutely crucial in terms of their life chances. And how they develop will be determined partly by genes, but very significantly by life experience. So nutrition is absolutely crucial. And not just of the child when it's born, but also maternal nutrition and whether the child is born low birth weight or not. Talk, play, love, response from caregivers are incredibly important, as well as protection from toxic stress. Neglect and abuse and other extreme forms of stress can actually trigger physical changes in a child that prevent their cognitive development later. So child protection is absolutely crucial. Less known is that environmental harm is also significant. Bad air quality, because PM 2.5, the very fine particles actually enter the bloodstream, can cause low birth weight babies and impair their organ and cognitive development. So environmental harm, as well as water and sanitation, are very significant also. Globally, we have 1 in 4 children under 5 who are stunted, which means that their immune system and their cognitive development is significantly impaired for life. Violent discipline is commonplace across the world, and 300 million children have actually witnessed societal violence or war. And yet, for every $1 that we spend in early childhood development, you get returns of over $13. The money spent early actually has a much, much bigger payback. But because the payback is seen later, in our very short-term societies, people are often not willing to make the investment. Indeed, the ability of adolescents to develop socio-emotionally and other things can be affected by their early childhood development. And then turning to the transition to adulthood, as young people enter sexual debut, they face a whole range of challenges, whether it's violence, whether it's misinformation from pornography, whether it's confusion about agency in relation to marriage, starting a family. There's a very little information for many adolescents around the world. Getting a job is a huge challenge, and making choices between continuing their education or helping on the family farm are very difficult choices that families have to make. Mental health is also a huge challenge during adolescence because different parts of their brain are forming in different ways. And then the beginning of political engagement. So I often wonder why investing in adolescents is not more attractive to politicians, because they are the millions of voters at every new election. So I'm going to ask the panel to think a little bit more about early childhood development and adolescence. Feel free to amplify also on the broader human capital questions. And then once we've heard from the panelists, we will turn to questions. So I'm going to start the panel with Reena Ray, the Secretary of Human Resource Development in India. Thank you. It's entirely up to you. You can use the microphone or you can go to the podium.
Thank you very much, Kate. Good afternoon. Happy New Year. A very warm welcome to everyone present here today, especially the Honorable Minister from UP, my distinguished panelists, the moderator, and everyone. I hope you're having a lovely meal. I was just telling everyone the last time I was at such an amazing gathering, I was actually sitting over there and there was a murder mystery going on over here. So nothing very dramatic today, just a couple of us talking about a very critical issue on children, school children. Kate has given us a very long remit, literally from birth to, let us say, the age of 18 for children. But I just like to take you on a very short journey about school education, particularly in India, since that's what I'm in charge of. I'm a civil servant, and I joined the government of India, the Indian Administrative Service, in 1984. So I've been working for more than 34 years in various areas. And when we talk about school education, let me give you a couple of names which you might all be very familiar with. We have Sundar Pichai, the head of Google. We have Satya Nadella, who's at the top of Microsoft. We have a host of Indians like Indira Nui, who was in Pepsi. We have them in Silicon Valley and countries all over the world doing remarkably well. They all studied in Indian schools. If being successful like them is any kind of benchmark, then obviously many Indian schools are actually getting it right by and large. But is that the exact story in the country? The truth is that while on the one hand we have very wonderful schools, if you look at numbers, and India being the populous country that it is, the biggest challenge we face are the numbers. We are looking at over 200 million school students alone, and the challenge of providing them with quality education is something which we are constantly working at on a regular basis. We run schools called the Kendriya Vidyalayas and the Navodaya Vidyalayas and the Sainik schools, if you've heard of them. So all are running remarkably well. If they do well, why do we still face challenges elsewhere? You must have heard of various surveys which talk about the low levels of learning outcomes, mostly in government schools across the country. So when we analyze this entire situation, we realize it's not just a question of teaching in the classroom. It's also an issue of creating the entire environment. It's about preschool education. It's about adolescence. It's about having counselors. It's about sports. One wonderful survey we did drew the connection between reading storybooks and actually performing very well in the classroom. So I'm happy to say now that we have developed and evolved a totally new initiative which looks at the 3+ child right till the age of 18 years old. When we talk about assessment, the various initiatives that we have taken or plan to take, and I'm sure you'll be interested in this, is that after many years, India is going to participate in the PISA exams. That's the Program for International Assessment for Students. We hope to do well, not in terms of marks in the test, but in terms of reflecting the health of the entire system. We're looking at these issues very carefully. When it comes to adolescence, I was sharing over lunch that I did work very closely on this issue many years ago. I was in charge of education in the government of Delhi, and we developed a new initiative called Yuva. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, the School Life Skills Program. I remember at that time that the number one concern of adolescents was access to school education, sex education, I'm sorry. They wanted to know what's different between boys and girls, what's menstruation, what's periods, what is in fact all of these issues which we talk about, but they wanted to know more about it. The second issue, which was of deep concern, was of self-image, especially pertaining to the color of their skin. If some of you will remember, up to 10 years ago, there was a very high-pitched media campaign that only girls who are very fair would ever get married or get good jobs. Now when I revisit the entire issue, I find a massive sea change. I find that adolescents now, largely because of access to pornography on internet and mobile phones, do not have that curiosity on sex education. Now, this may not necessarily be a good thing, because access to deviant sexual pornography on the internet may not be the solution to curiosity on how does the human body work. But one good thing is, because of all of you and everyone outside, the companies who used to actually sell the whitening creams, they have piped down. The wonderful thing is the self-image of adolescents is going up, irrespective of the color of the skin and the shape of their bodies. There's a lot of good happening along with the not so good. What are the new areas they are looking at according to our surveys? It's jobs, which is the #1 concern of adolescents today. Jobs comes back to school education. It comes back to, can we equip the children with skills in robotics, in artificial intelligence, and all the other areas so that they are prepared to take on their roles as proper citizens of the next few decades or so. It's a challenge which we are facing. We hope to work together with organizations like the World Bank, with UNICEF, with private parties. We are blessed in India with some enormously wonderful organizations which help us in this regard. The challenge is massive, 250 million children. The challenge to give good schooling to 3 years to 18, to give them a proper midday meal. We're very proud of our midday meal program. All children in government schools get a proper meal every day, fully nutritious with all the required calorie content.
Thank you,
Hunger to a
Secretary.
large extent has totally disappeared. Just one point I'd just like to make. In spite of the challenges, are we hopeful or not that we will achieve what we're trying to do? I'd just like to share a brief experience. About 10 years back, I was almost arrested because I was talking about menstruation and trying to teach it to girls in the classroom. I never believed, never believed that 10 years later, thanks largely to the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan launched by this government, that not only would menstruation become such a common word that we would talk about, but we would be having conferences where our ministers would be discussing this subject, would be discussing the issue of how to give sanitary napkins to every girl. We've come a huge way. Compared to that, I feel all of the other battles are very easily attainable and overcome. We got our fingers crossed. We know we'll get there. Look forward to working with you and sharing your experiences and suggestions. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your optimism. That's great. I will make up for the others in time and questions, and I'd now like to invite the next speaker, who is the country director of the World Bank Group in India. Mr. Ahmad, please have your 5 minutes. I'll let you know when 4 minutes are up.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much. I must say two things immediately in the reaction to our colleagues who have spoken. First, the minister talked about UP being the largest state in India and the growth of India depending on UP. I have to tell you, UP is the largest subnational democracy in the world. This is what UP will do, will not only affect India, it affects 8% of the world's poor, and it affects a lot of subnational governments around the world that even come close to having the size of UP. Second is I have to congratulate the Secretary for what I think is going to be a tectonic signaling when you sign on the PISA. I think this is a clear signal of where India is headed. Let me focus on this relation between technology and human capital. We all are talking about the uncertainty of what technological changes will do in terms of the labor market. I want to say that as an economist, we have learned early on in our teaching never to predict, never to worry about the future from a predictive point of view, but deal with the risks that emerge. So this relation between technology and human capital actually is forcing us to rethink some of the paradigms of delivery today rather than trying to anticipate what will happen in terms of the technology. So what are some of the changes that are happening? First, the conversation between the Minister of Health or the Secretary of Education and the Minister of Finance has completely changed. Before, the conversation was, how much money will you give me so I can deliver education and I can deliver health? Today, the education ministers, secretaries, and health ministers are asking the finance minister, how much are you willing to invest in human capital so I can give you economic growth? Technology and human capital relationships have made health, education the drivers of economic growth, not the consumer of social expenditure. And that's a significant shift in the political economy of how we look at these subjects, first. Second is you can no longer look at the whole education education from a narrow perspective, but have to really look at it from a life cycle perspective. And I think the life cycle perspective, as correctly pointed out, starts with the mother and then moves down the chain, the first 1,000 days, and then beyond. But here, I have to say that the question that I ask from the World Bank point of view is not about the future, but more about back to the future. And the sense is, how are state capabilities changing to improve service delivery? If the systems of service delivery in education, health, social protection remain the same, you're not going to be able to deal with the uncertainties of the future. So the nature of how you deliver education, the nature of how you deliver health has got to change. And I think that's where a lot of our efforts have to focus. The big shift is investment in early childhood. Fair enough, but how are you going to do the investment in early childhood? Is it going to be a government, school-led investment? Is it going to be a state government given the responsibility to actually innovate, because AGOA is very different than UP? Is it that you're going to remain within government public service systems, or you're going to move into how you engage ASHA workers or contracted workers? The nature of the service delivery story, decentralization, the type of services, that to me is the question that has to be answered today in order to deal with this relationship between technology and human capital. And I think that the type of policies that are emerging from Shamagra Shiksha or from the type of hospital reforms in UP will lay the grounds of what can be changed in terms of investing in the life cycle. Within the life cycle, another area which is extremely important is I don't think you're going to have children going from class 1 to class 12. There's going to be a movement from schools to jobs to skills and then back to schools. Are we changing the nature of delivery of school system to allow that kind of flexibility? And so the skilling ministry, which is a very big part of Prime Minister Modi's vision, is an interesting story because usually we don't think of a skillings ministry as being important, but I think it's important in the context of health and education. And I think how skills are brought into the curriculum of education becomes very, very critical. I think the other factor that I would put on the table is informality. The world is going towards more and more informal jobs. So informal is the new formal. If informal is the new formal, we have to begin to look at formal social protection systems for the informal sector. If governments can create that system, you're going to see that informal and technology will interface in a much more healthy way, and people will not be left behind. And that's a very, very critical linkage. Let me conclude with two statistics which are telling and which make this conversation today very important. Preschool education in India, for every dollar spent or every rupee spent, gives an economic return 25 times more. 1 to 25. No finance minister can walk away from that kind of numbers. Second is you take a country like Vietnam, which has invested in pre-education and has gone into PISA. Its PISA numbers are the level of Finland. How can a country of the level of Vietnam achieve that kind of numbers? it's because they're going into a life cycle investment in human capital, starting with pre-education and pre-investing in early childhood. It just confirms to us how important and how human capital investment early on has changed because of the role of technology.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand the floor to the representative of UNICEF in India, Yasmin Ali-Haq. Thank you.
Thank you, and special thanks actually to the organizers for bringing children into the dialogue, into the discussion. And the whole theme of the panel, from labor to leadership, recognizing that if we are to build a strong leadership for the coming years, we have to be investing in children today. And I think many of us say, you know, children are our future. Children are telling us, please stop calling us your future. We're here today. We're part of the family. We're learning. We're working. We're contributing to the family, to our community today. So don't leave us for tomorrow. Unless we're investing in children today, we will not be getting the returns that we are looking for tomorrow. So that's, I think, one important part of it. The second, just to take the return on investment a bit further, the return on investment is on the individual, that if you're investing $1 in early childhood care, in early stimulation, in early childhood education, then the adult earnings can go up by 25% per year. So that's for the individual. It contributes to the economy also. We've heard the return of, for every dollar investment, there's a $13 return in economic benefit for the country. But also, if we were to look at what is the loss if we do not invest, in terms of not being, having a youth force who are able to go into the labor market, not investing in young people to take on leadership skills, to build their life skills, then there is a loss also which really we haven't yet calculated. But it's likely to be many times the investments that we're making in health and in education. The second dimension I'd like to focus on is that of gender. Recently in December, the Global Gender Gap Report for 2018 was published. And it showed globally we're doing better in terms of the gap in education and in health and survival. These are two areas where the focus over the years has brought about great improvement. The areas where the world is lagging behind is in terms of women's participation in political domain and in the economic sphere. And these two are again linked to what investment is made in girls especially to bring the divide, to reduce the divide. So whatever benefits we're seeing of the education divide being reduced now, we're going to see the return a number of years later. And I think that's also another factor, that the return on investment doesn't happen in 2 or 3 years. It's going to be happening over another 10, 15, 20 years maybe. And when governments are planning budgets and planning programs that are 5-year cycles, then taking that into consideration, there has to be a longer-term vision for governments, for societies to see these benefits being reaped. I think the third dimension that I'd like to focus on is the enabling environment. So we've heard about the service delivery, we've talked about the systems, the structures. Honorable Health Minister for UP brought in that dimension of working with communities. And I think that's really important because a lot of this is dependent upon practices and behavior in communities, in societies. And with the Dastar program, a lot of the development of the program was going to households and finding from them what their health-seeking behavior was, what their hygiene practices are. And building on that, the program then put in place messaging that really reversed some of those behaviors and prevented scrub typhus and children being affected by encephalitis. So a lot of that, are we listening to young people? what are their aspirations? How do we fold that into our skilling programs, our education programs? Reena talked about how, because they listen to young people, there is understanding that sex and sexuality is something that they find the most information gap. And unless we're listening to it and building it into our programs, we won't be reaching there. Early childhood development, the role of the father, bringing in the role of the boy in understanding gender dynamics, reducing the gender divide. These are all issues that unless we proactively program them into our work, unless we proactively bring the community voice, the enabling environment into the discussion, we will not be making the types of ambitious targets that we have set ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the best timekeeper so far as well, so well done for that. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Manoj Dilani from the Ministry of Health. Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Minister and dignitaries on the dais. Madam Reena Ray spoke about storytelling contributing to improved learning outcomes. I'll start with an anecdote. This is ascribed to Einstein, great scientist. A lady who was an admirer of great scientist Einstein approached him and said, I want my child to be a scientist like you. What do I need to do with my child? And he said, tell fairy tales. She was slightly taken aback. Oh, I am being serious. I want my child to be really intelligent like you, become a scientist like you. Then tell more fairy tales. Okay. That was the reply. Now, the basic thing, and the moderator spoke about ECD, in terms of the importance of stimulation and cognition. And if you look at the basic fact that almost 80% of the brain development happens in the first 1,000 days, and almost 50% of the height grows in the first 1,000 days. If you look in terms of brain head circumference, 80% of the head circumference, 80% of the growth in head circumference happens in the first 2 years. So obviously it is the most critical phase in a person's life. Now, what is brought out, and what the moderator also brought out, that almost 40 billion neurons get formed by the time the baby is in the womb for 40 weeks, and then almost 700 to 1,000 neuron connections happen every second during those first 1,000 days. So I'm really going to be focusing much more on the ECD component of it. And while, so there are programs through the Poshan Abhiyan and all on the nutritional side, we're trying to address that. There are also programs on the health side. So we have got an RM and CH program. And the focus is on not only on survival, so that's where we started early with the MDGs and all, but basically on survive, thrive, and transform. So the third element of it, which is in terms of the stimulation, which would impact in terms of cognition, social, emotional health, and these three together, the nutrition, the health, and the social and emotional health component through stimulation. Now that, unfortunately, can't happen through a programmatic intervention so much. It has to become a way of life within a family. So what we need to be doing is to provide support to the families so that the way they live in the households, and there's a lot of good practices. I mean, we've all been accustomed to hearing Dadi Nani stories being told to the babies, and that is what really is very vital and critical to stimulate the imagination of the baby. So the 5 senses, which would provide the stimulation, combined with the love, care, and stimulation through things like storytelling, which would heighten the imagination of the baby, are really the critical things which will not only enhance the cognition potential, but will also enhance the social and economic well-being. And it is not only an issue for those children, like we are dealing with children at risk in terms of those who are discharged from our special newborn care units or nutritional rehabilitation centers, etc. Obviously, you need to be working much more with them. Then there are others who would be at risk, and they need to be addressed in terms of trying to mitigate those risk factors which are going to impact the cognition and the emotional and social well-being of the baby during those critical years. And the third element is that all, even well-to-do children, so in our households, need to reach from where they're reach to their maximum potential. So there are a lot of children who would reach good potential but probably not reach to the maximum potential. Now, there is enough evidence to show that more than 40% of the children are really not reaching to their maximum potential. So that's a huge gap, and that's where the investments need to be. I don't want to reel out numbers. There are a whole lot of numbers in terms of the kind of returns on investments that you can get, whether in terms of immunization, whether in terms of nutrition, whether in terms of ECD. But I would just quote Nobel laureate James Heckman, who did state clearly that the return on investment is highest when we spend money on the prenatal and natal programs and in programs that target on the earliest years of life. Now,
That's 5 minutes,
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Assistant Secretary. Thank you.
So we are, I mean, there are a whole range of interventions which are dealing on the RMNCH life cycle approach. We are now focusing in terms of trying to create an enabling, supporting environment for the families so that in their way of life, while they're dealing with the babies, they and also dealing with the pregnant women, we see the changes which will enhance the cognitive potential of the babies. Thank you so much.
And sorry for the interruptions. I'm just hoping that we get time for discussion, everyone. So Priyank from the Commission on the Protection of Child Rights in India, you are our last speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. And first of all, I would like to thank the Observer Research Foundation, as Yasmin already flagged that for the first time this type of platform, they have opened a discussion for the children, and they tried to keep the children in center of the discussion. I would like to congratulate Honorable Minister from Uttar Pradesh at this forum. After enactment of Right to Education Act, it became possible from last year to provide admissions under Section 12(1)(c) for the children of economically weaker section in the private schools. So I would like to congratulate, sir. I am not a good orator, and I will talk on only two issues which were mentioned in the concept note earlier. The one is how private sector can be incentivized, and other is how government can invest in development of children's. So today, as we are in knowledge age, and competition cannot be calculated on the basis of balance sheets of corporates. They have to be more responsible towards the planet, towards the population, and towards the people for whom they are working for. So first of all, the principal responsibility of the corporates is most essential thing, what I think, in respect to the investing in children and get an incentive from investing in a children. I must urge to the private sector, don't keep the children in isolation. When you talk about your own development, when you talk about incentivized in your own investments towards your own business, the children will get its benefit automatically when you invest in the society. Though keep the children in the center. When you talk about investing in the society, when you talk about investing in your own businesses, the children are the key stakeholders of the society, so keep this in the mind. Like an example, India contributed a lot. India contributed a lot in maintaining the standards of child safety, of elimination of child labor, like in apparel industry. Everybody knows the rates and the prices of fabric are almost same in the countries, in the nationwide. The material is prescribed as per the norms. But if you curtail the price of procurement for import from the developing countries like India, like Bangladesh, like other South Asian countries, so you will get, you are creating a problem of child labor there. And I must say that India has contributed in this sector, despite we are far behind from the Bangladesh today with respect to our exports in the apparel sector. Another thing where we can find out the gaps between the schemes and the legislations and the policies, while we talk about skill development, so I must say on this platform that there is still a gap in the skill development of adolescents. We have our child labor laws which prohibits the children to work before the completion of age of 15 years. But we don't have any specific scheme for skill development of children in the age group of 15 to 18 years. We have a proper protection of law under Right to Education Act for completion of education till the age of 14 years. But after completion of fundamental education as per Right to Education Act, we don't have anything in the gap of 15 to 18 years for adolescent for skilling up them towards vocational education or keeping them ready to face the world with a skill in their hand. And another thing, we are talking about early childhood education. Every speaker talked about early childhood education. I must say only one thing. While we are investing and we are talking about early childhood education, we are facing a gap to enable our Anganwadi workers, to enable them as early childhood education providers. So we have to fill these small gaps. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We all of us love the little children in our lives and in our families desperately, and I sometimes wonder why that love of children is not reflected in national economic and political priorities. At the end of this round, I'm going to ask all of the speakers to think about how we can bring the welfare of children into our daily lives as corporate and political and other leaders. So I'll ask all of you to come with a recommendation of an action that you can take in any position of leadership. But before we do that, we're going to open for questions on the floor. So I will take the first three and then ask the panel. So I have the lady at the front here, this gentleman here, and then there's a lady at the back. Do you have microphones on your tables? Yes, go ahead. We'll take three questions and then we'll take some more if everyone's brief.
Check. Thank you so much. I'm Laura Yerikeshev from Kazakhstan, Almaty, Central Asia. And Mr. Junaid, Kamal Ahmad, you absolutely correctly was talking about the changing paradigm of this life cycle, lifelong education, and as an e-learning education. Here in Kazakhstan, we started with UNESCO 1 year back, one program on intercultural dialogue platform, like combining e-learning and skills education into the curriculum. So my question is how that could be reflected, taking into account the more diversified culture of each country involved in this globalization process, because we're interconnecting with interacting with each other, and what kind of curriculums, informal, both formal, could be placed within the schools, I mean, from maybe from of Uttar Pradesh state, and how this could be reflected or particularly exemplified in India. So this is e-learning education as far as intercultural dialogue is concerned, and under intercultural, I mean the whole way of life, not between ethnic groups and
Thank you
ways
very
of
much.
living.
Sir.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rajiv Saxena. I retired from the government as the senior most officer of NIC for 11 months. I've worked in many programs for the education and for child rights. I know Priyank very well, and I'm very well aware of her also. I've worked with him. I have two suggestions. One of them is cyber security and social media is really affecting the kids of the country. 3 years back, before I retired, I gave a lecture at IIM Shillong, at the same place where our Honorable President had a heart attack, and I was addressing at the same platform. My lecture on human rights and in the ICT era went on for about 3.5 hours to 4 hours. There were so many questions. And I would like to make an initiative to make the kids aware about the security problems with the social media, email, and so on and so forth. So ma'am, my request to you, if you can collaborate with information and broadcasting, and if the World Bank can make a funding of that, record my thing, post it on a portal, and in the prime time, in the evening, we can take questions live. And I'll not take any money for my station, because the World Bank and the UN agencies have given me 8 UN assignments, so I have enough money for that. It's just a suggestion over there.
Thank you,
It
sir.
would be a very good initiative for the people of the country and the kids for the country, because in the high school age, they are most prone to the cyber attacks and cyber security frauds, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The lady at the back, yes.
Hi, I'm Ananta Gaur. I'm a B school student, and I've been studying in all-girls institution all my life. And I've never happened to see a trans woman or a trans man in my class. And I can proudly say that India has just slashed the section 377, which criminalized LGBTQ community. And as I like to say it, we've decriminalized humanity. So I'd like to ask you if there are any frameworks in place that take care of gender identity, gender exploration, sexual orientations, and these sorts of tabooed and stigmatized topics that we have within the society in India, and how we're tackling the kind of sexual abuse and the harassment that people face in schools.
Thank you. So we had 3 questions, one on e-learning, one on internet security, and one on trans rights and harassment. And lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights, I think, was also the question. So brief answers, and then we might have time for another round of questions. Does anyone want to respond to any of those?
Just a few points to rejoinder. I'm glad you raised that issue. In fact, on Saturday, we had the Governing Council meeting of the NCRT, that's our apex body on academics under school education, and exactly the same suggestion did emerge. So we are working on, can you hear me? We're working on the next steps in terms of cybersecurity, and we're working with the security agencies in this regard also. In terms of the question on transgender, I think you'll be happy to know that from this year, all our databases, which used to be male and female, now have a third gender also. So we started the process of collecting that data from schools throughout the country. The moment we do that, we're actually basically telling everyone that the door is now open for you to discuss these issues. So we hope that in the coming weeks and months, there will be a much larger debate on all of these aspects, actually. Thank you for raising these. Yes.
Thank you. One more response.
I'll just add to the transgender. Yep. Okay. Well, we have welcomed them in the political arena. So they are mayors, and now they're contesting elections also. So I don't see much of an issue that the government, while framing the policy, would be looking ahead and will be more proactive towards it.
On the issue of e-learning and intercultural exchange, it's a very interesting and powerful question. First, within countries, the World Bank has been focusing quite a bit on education that addresses different cultural groups in a country, tribal groups, different ethnic groups, but in a way to create universal access to education. So within countries, you have significant attempt to cross-cultural barriers in terms of access to services. In my country, in Bangladesh, we have created a major program in terms of bringing tribal groups into the education system. And I have to tell you that the Rohingya crisis worries me quite a bit, because if we are unable to integrate the Rohingya community inside Bangladesh, there is a potential, we're already seeing it, of abuse of child girls, drugs, and radicalization. So huge effort has to be made in creating the intercultural education. Crossing country boundaries, which I think is also, I'm not sure that we have invested, but obviously private sector and others are doing quite a bit of that, and e-learning reaches out automatically. But I am not aware of a conscious attempt to use e-learning in the intercultural exchanges. One issue on the transgender and LGBT, the World Bank's social safeguards programs are now, by law, we cannot do projects in any country unless we address the issue of access to services by all communities, and then specifically LGBT transgender group.
Great. I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. The lady at the front here, because you were very patient, and the gentleman right behind with the glasses.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
It's okay.
I have 2 questions. I think very brief. One to Junaid and the other to Ms. Haq. Junaid, I'm from ORF, and I had. Do you think in India only 71 MPs in the lower house are below the age of 40? The average age of MPs in India is 56 years. Do you think we need more representation of younger people who can make more youth-friendly laws? Do you think that is an important thing? That would be.
You're asking a 50-plus-year-old
But you work on development issues, so you would be an expert in this. And Yasmin, I wanted to raise the question about rat pickers in India. So most of the rat pickers or scavengers in India are children. What work is being done in this regard?
First, why spoil our chances?
Thank you. And then we'll take the question from the gentleman right behind her, and then we'll have to wrap up, I'm afraid. I have instructions to vacate this room in the next 10 minutes.
Thank
You can project your voice.
My question is really for Honorable Minister. In this era of competitive federalism, we've seen the success of what doing business did in the states. States are vying against each other, trying to create a better environment for the business to operate in the states. How open would states like yours be to having a similar kind of competition on human capital? how the states invest and get results on human capital and have a, because it may create that focus that may be missing right now.
Well, Uttar Pradesh, in last 2 years, we have actually come up with Uttar Pradesh Industrial Investment Employment Policy. So that's, it's just not the industrial policy. And we came up with sectoral policies, which were 18 of them, so as to support. And that resulted in 2017 itself, 2018, February 2018, we had a 4.28 lakh crores MOUs being signed. And I'm happy to share that last in August, the groundbreaking ceremony, which was inaugurated by the Prime Minister, was of 60,000 crores. So we are seeing a lot of investment now coming into Uttar Pradesh. Another lot is ready of 50,000 crores. But that means that you have to harness your own human resources. So we are investing a lot in, as I said, in from the childhood stage. And then we are taking it up, looking at various aspects. Since I had 10 minutes to speak, so I couldn't say much. But for example, I said on the school, the dropout rates, not to go, the dropouts has to. So we are investing into the human resources. And skill development is something which you'll be surprised that as a state, I don't think any state has put up a budget of 1,000 crores for the startups. So we already have more than 1,200 startups which are going out in Uttar Pradesh. And I was just telling Junaid, when we met first time, it was part of the budget. We were only, on the health sector, we were just doing 16,000 crores. It has gone up to 22,000 crores. And that's to the supplementary budget, support. So we are putting a lot of our efforts, and we would love people to remain there, work there. And as I said, we want to be the backbone of India's growth.
So any answers to the question on youth participation in politics or work with rag pickers?
Unfortunately, I don't have any statistics that says if a parliament is younger, what impact it has in the policy making. We do know that the shift of women coming into politics and parliament has made a huge difference in how money is spent. In local governments, we have seen movement of self-help groups of women into Panchayati Raj, and the nature of spending on health and education has dramatically changed. But what I do know is that regardless of where the political system is in terms of its age profile, ability to access voices of everyone in society is very important. And I think the minister's example of listening to children going to school and what matters for them. So I think I would translate your question and its importance in saying, accessing the voice of young, it's a young society. So South Asia is a very young society. Accessing their voice, I think, is essential in the democratic path that we choose.
I want to answer the question of rate pickers. The issue of engagement of children in begging is already addressed in Section 76 of Juvenile Justice Act 2015. What I am telling here as begging, in the Bombay Beggars Act, the begging is well defined. The rate pickers are included in the definition, broad definition of begging, and National Commission for Protection of Child Rights is already working on a SOP, and soon we will start a pilot of our SOP in 5 cities. Then we will definitely recommend it to the state governments and central government for better implementation.
So we've got so little time. I'm going to ask each of you for 2 sentences only. The first sentence is, what topic do you think would get this panel on childhood onto the main stage? That's the first sentence. The second sentence is, what action would you like everybody here to take? What would you recommend an action that they can take in their day-to-day work that would affect human capital development in India? So starting with the minister, what topic and what action?
Well, as the action, the government, the central government has already initiated it through various schemes. I don't need to dwell on that. And the state governments are following. So it's it's become imperative for all the state governments or any central government now coming in that they do take care of the child development and invest in that. So policies are being framed. So I'm quite sure it will continue. And the budget will keep going up on that.
So you see it as a challenge largely of implementation?
Well, certainly.
Thank you. And what issue do you think would be so interesting this panel will end up on the main stage next year at Raisina?
Well, I'm sure we'll come up with better results. And my take would be from here is, how do we get the private participation more in investing into child development? That's a key thing that I'm interested in.
Great, thank you. The role of corporate's great. Rina Ray.
I think that if before we invested in property or put our money in stocks and shares and fixed deposits, if we also pause to think that human capital is actually just another variety of the same capital we are doing. So if we can invest in one, we can jolly well invest in the other one. We should start thinking along that line. That will help. And on a slightly flippant note, if I may, I think the best way to get us on the front screen everywhere is to give children the vote. What do you feel? Once they have the power to vote, and everybody realizes that the biggest group is here, perhaps, you know, what their voices will count the most, actually.
Or their votes could be weighted based on an actuarial assessment of their life expectancy at the point of the vote.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Short-termism in our society. Mr. Ahmed.
I would request the audience here to do two things. One is ask your state, if you are an Indian, ask your state to publish the human capital index of that state. Right? Where do they stand? Second is we are about to try and get women's livelihood bonds floated in the capital markets. If you see it floated, buy a share, because that is going to go directly into financing women entrepreneurs. In terms of action that we will take, one of the things that we've been thinking about, and I'd like to put this out as a commitment here, and it's the first time I'm saying it in public, we're going to establish state partnerships. Rather than just do projects in states, we'll establish state partnerships. We're going to ask those state partnerships to come from the state. They will define the way forward, except there will be one, and I'll say it with pride, condition of the World Bank. You have to invest in a project in adolescent girls. If you do that, we're willing to enter into any kind of state partnership you want.
Thank you. Yasmin.
So what would draw the attention of the main stage in a forum that talks about world economies, talks about politics, talks about weapons, talks about technology? The fact that every month 10 million young people enter the job market worldwide. And unless this is addressed, unless we look at their aspirations, their opportunities, investing in them, the public-private sectors coming together to deliver on it in terms of their skills, in terms of opportunities, then we are not doing the world a favor. So I think that is something that the center stage needs to take into consideration. What would I wish for our participants here to go back and reflect on and to act on? One is continuing with Rina's point on investing in children. In India, over the next 20 years, 450 million young people are going to be entering the job market. That's a huge number. If India is to succeed, we have to be paying attention to them as they are children. 26 million of them are born every year. So we need to be investing in nurturing the health, nutrition, early childhood stimulation side. We need to invest in their learning so that the foundational skills are there. The skilling in terms of transferable skills, digital skills, etc. And of course their agency, their ability to communicate, to voice, to interact, to network, and to build a world that they see fit.
Thanks. In terms of what one would like to advise them, in view of the criticality of the ECD for human capital, I think we must do everything possible that we can to advocate for ECD, both from one at the level of family and other at our workplaces and wherever we can influence. In terms of how do you move to the center stage, I think the criticality of human capital is what we need to highlight in terms of getting us to the center stage there. Yeah.
That must be more responsible towards the children and keep more reporting to us. Keep the commissions working round the clock. Just raise your voice towards the children and keep reporting the issues of violation of child rights. That will get us on the work. And the another thing, while we're talking about the investment in children, we spoke earlier about the CSR fundings. When we look at the data of funding of CSR in India, when we look at the data of 2015-16, only 0.1% of overall expenditure was reported in northeastern states of the country. Those are the most vulnerable states and vulnerable area in the country. So so please invest beyond the geographical boundaries, and don't invest through your own foundations only. Just find out good NGOs, good foundations, good people around you to invest beyond your geographical boundaries. Thank you.
So with the moderator's prerogative, I'm going to recommend to Samir that we have on the main stage next year a topic about adolescent and youth well-being, a topic for security and political stability, and that we have a mix of people from the human capital community, the corporate community, and the security community having a joined-up conversation about the contributions of human capital to political security and stability. I would like to thank you all for an exciting panel, and I'd like to thank you all for your patience over lunch. Please give yourselves a round of applause.